Okay. So welcome to the first IIRF webinar. I know that the attendees, if you are not used to this format of webinar, only the panelists will have the cameras on. But if you want to share your opinion or maybe send some specific question for one of the panelists, you can use the Q&A button down in the panel. We will recollect all these questions for the final part of the webinar, but still some of the panelists, if they are willing to answer right away, to try to use the time better, because we only have one hour for this webinar. Please share your opinions and your questions, and we'll be trying to collect them and answer during the webinar. My name is Marcela Bordón. I am the Program Officer and Research Associate of the International Institute for Religious Freedom. For the ones that they don't know the IIRF. The International Institute for Religious Freedom was founded in 2007 with the mission to promote religious freedom for all faiths from an academic perspective. And we provide reliable and unbiased data on religious freedom to strengthen the academic research on the topics and inform public policy in all levels. Our research results are disseminated through the International Journal for Religious Freedom and other publications, and the IIRF has a global presence, and academic and advocacy partners are over the continents. One of our partners is the Institute for the Study of Freedom of Religion or Belief, ISFORB, from Belgium, and they are now with us as our guests. And we are going to talk about a very interesting topic that has to be with the challenges on religious communities in European secular states and beyond. We added the word beyond because we have a special panelist or international director who is going to talk about the reality of secular states in Latin America. And this topic is very interesting for all of us. We are planning to do a webinar each 2 months from the IIRF. So we invite you to be attentive to our social media or invitation or newsletters to know which other topics we are going to talk in the future. So now I would like to introduce our first panelist. Dr. Tatiana Kopaleishvili is the coordinator of the Institute of the Study of Freedom of Religion or Belief, and a postdoctoral researcher at the Department of Religious Studies and Missiology at ETF Leuven in Belgium. Her current research focuses on church-state relations in Georgia, and she is going to introduce us about the last volume of the International Journal for Religious Freedom, where Tatiana and Jelle were the guest editors. And how they get to this topic, they want to share with us another invitation.
Thank you, Marcela, for this introduction and for this opportunity to introduce to the wider public the fruit of our collaboration, the issue of the International Journal on Religious Freedom. But before we look into the content of the journal, allow me to give a little bit of an information about the context in which this journal issue came to existence. And the context is, of course, the institute that you mentioned, the research institute called Institute for the Studies of Freedom of Religion or Belief, which was founded 4 years ago. By the initiative of our dear professor, Dr. Christoph Sauer. He's a guest professor of religious studies and missiology and probably well known to your circles. The idea was to establish an interdisciplinary research institute focusing on issues of religious freedom in Europe. And so his dream came true through the hard work of our dear Professor Jelle Creemers. And this was the reason why I got connected to ETF Leuven in 2019. And together with the research team, we established this International Research Institute And you see the team here. It is quite interdisciplinary. It includes scholars in religion, law, social science, theology, history, pedagogics. The way we imagined the institute was, of course, through the challenge we experienced, that the right of every individual to freedom of religion or belief was under growing pressure and criticism in Europe. So therefore focused research into the value of this right, the conflicts it engenders, and the freedoms it protects is both important and urgent. And we converted it into our mission and vision statement. So ISFORB imagines an inclusive society where everyone can truly believe in freedom. And as the research institute located close to Brussels, we contribute to a vibrant Europe through research and education on the interplays of society, human rights, and religion. And we also cultivate a dynamic interdisciplinary community of scholars, which allows for deeper engagement with current discussions on religion in the public sphere. So this vision and mission was converted into 4 strategic priorities, which implied research on religious freedom, of course, publications, professional or scholarly, building a FORB research community, training FORB researchers, and providing academic service and education. And if you look at our activities at ISFORB, you will see that they are very strictly following these 4 strategic priorities, and let me mention some of them. So we try to build up the research community by conducting monthly meetings. They can be open, sometimes they are closed. And mainly we aim to give space to the younger scholars, PhD students, to present the piece of work, learn, test, get feedback from more experienced colleagues. Sometimes we open these sessions for the wider audience, and we invite experienced specialists or maybe author of the newly released publication. And by listening, we learn and grow together. So we also try to contribute to the growth of FORB researchers. Also, they can be from a variety of disciplines, but since 2022, we introduced this new program, ISFORB Visiting Scholarship Program, which offers opportunity for 1 or 2 scholars every year to come to ETF Leuven and have a focused research time up to 3 months. They can have this focused time. Also, they can participate in ISFORB activities, also present their work at the end of their stay at our annual ISFORB conference. So far, we had 3 scholars visiting us from Ukraine, Brazil, Georgia, and we hope to have many more in the future. Of course, teaching is an integral part of our work at ISFORB. We offer courses on the FORB, and the last one we offered was in 2023, and it was our summer course on religious freedom and religious persecution. And this year we aim to offer a course to the African scholars, and we hope to equip them with the course in such a manner that will bring it back to their institutions and teach their students. Of course, the main event of the year is our ISFORB conference. And it's an annual event, takes place always in the first Thursday and Friday of May. And we started it in a very difficult circumstances in 2021. It was a COVID time. And we couldn't even estimate how successful this event will be because it was online. But since then it is growing. And this year we have unprecedented number of papers that came in, proposals for papers. So we will have about 30 papers, 30 presenters talking on the topic of propagation and deconversion, conflict of individual and group rights. If you are interested to participate in this conference, of course, it's a bit late for call for papers, for presenting a paper, but you can participate as a listener, and if you you are wishing to participate, please contact us after the meeting. So, of course, the babies of these conferences are our publications. And so far, we were working on 2 publications. One is published, another is around the corner. It's in IIRF series, Religious Freedom and COVID-19, a European perspective. And the one we want to focus today on is our IIRF issue, Challenges of Religious Communities in European Secular States. So let me take you briefly through the content of this volume, and thereafter we can focus in more details on a couple of articles. There are 7 articles in this volume. 2 out of 7 are opinion articles. The authors come from different academic disciplines, such as law, history, theology, sociology. Their articles draw attention to specific communities in particular countries or regions, and most articles contain stories and facts that often have turned and still turn non-religious or religious communities' life into nightmares. Let me take you through every article very briefly. While very diverse in content, methodologies, and style, the combined articles are a strong appeal to non-religious communities, scholars, and actors in advocacy and public administration to remain vigilant and to keep an eye on one another also on the European continent. So Jonathan Fox was the main speaker at our 2023 conference. He is from the Bar-Ilan University in Israel, and in his article, he debunks the myth about Europe being a secular and religiously free. He analyzes data from his religion and state database for 43 European states. And in a couple of minutes, Professor Jelle Creemers will tell us about his article in more details. This European reality discussed in Jonathan Fox's article has implications, of course, for communities that seek autonomy. Ari De Pater and Dennis Petri from International Institute for Religious Freedom argue in their opinion article for the importance of religious autonomy, and that if people are free to join and leave the community, religious autonomy should prevail, and that authorities should have compelling reasons to interfere in religious communities. So not only religious, but also non-religious communities can struggle from for societal recognition. Adelaida Matera from University of Messina in Italy approaches from a legal perspective the place of non-religion in Italian society. In the article on criminology, as they say, in Putin's Russia, Tatiana Vahramenko, University College Cork, and Francisco Arqueres, University of Almeria, draw attention to the fate of Jehovah's Witnesses. They demonstrate how the trials against them and the creation of an institution of legal religious experts who persecute them are grounded in late Soviet anti-sectarian models and narratives. A Russian repression of religious life is, however, not limited to Russian Federation. Alexandra Kovalenko was our ISFORB visiting scholar, and she became our visiting scholar at ETF in early 2022, right after Russian tanks began to cross the borders with Ukraine. And in her opinion article, Kovalenko gives us a sobering account of violations of freedom of religion and belief rights in Ukraine, in occupied Crimea, Donetsk, and Luhansk regions. Particular attention goes to violence against religious life since the full-scale aggression in February, including the destruction of religious sites, killings of priests, and persecution of various religious groups. So we have also 2 contributors who are a bit far from Europe, and they enrich our volume by that. Verghese John, South Asia Advanced Christian Studies, Bangalore, India. brings us to the challenges of new Christians in Hindu-dominated India. He explores how converts to Christianity tend to navigate a complex social landscape by occupying hybridized sites, seeking to remain Hindu while following Christ. And the last but not the least, Dennis Petri, International Institute for Religious Freedom, introduces us to complexities within religious minorities, taking us to the NASA indigenous territories in the southern highlands of Colombia. And of course, I will not say more because he will present his article himself. So this is shortly about the issue, content of the issue. And in a minute, we can listen to in a more detailed analysis of 2 articles that are included in this volume. Thank you.
Thank you, Tatiana, for your presentation, especially for introducing us about the work that you do in the ISFORB. The details that you gave about the issue, they are very interesting. We invite you all to visit our website, iirf.global, where you can find the publication of the International Journal and see not only this volume, but the previous one with very interesting topics and special issues that we have regarding the religious freedom issues that are going on the last years. Right now, I would like to introduce Dr. Jelle Creemers. He is the director of the Institute of the Study of Freedom of Religion or Belief, and is the chair of the Department of Religious Studies and Missiology in the ETF Belgium. His current research focuses on church-state relations in Belgium, and he is going to give us an introduction to the topic of secular states. He's going to give us an approach to one of the papers that can give us a better idea how the volume is trying to approach to this phenomenon of the relation between the state and religion. So, Professor Jelle, you're going to share your screen or something?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you very much. I hope you can all see my screen. I am very grateful to IIRF, the International Institute of Religious Freedom, for the possibility for us to present here and to show us the special issue of the journal that IIRF is organizing. And as indicated, I will present actually the content of one of the articles in this volume, which I think is very interesting indeed. And it's written by Jonathan Fox, as was already shortly said, professor of political studies at Bar Ilan University in Israel. And he has written quite a number of publications on the topic of religion-state relations worldwide. He was invited to speak particularly about religion-state relations in Europe. And he did that with a lot of expertise, and that was very interesting. What did he do in this article? 5 elements, short introduction, then he spoke about government support for religion, then about government regulations, restrictions and controls of majority religions, and then by government-based religious discrimination of minorities. And I will introduce these elements shortly and also work towards the conclusion of this article. And of course, as you understand, this is not my article. I also don't necessarily agree with everything that's in there, but I'm very happy to present it to you because I see a lot of value in this article when we're trying to understand Europe and the particularities of Europe as a so-called secular continent. The 2 main contributions of this article are, first, he demonstrates that there is a certain European pattern, that in Europe policies are very similar to each other, also among very different nations, those that declare separation of religion and state and those who have an official religion. And secondly, Fox argues that European secularism includes a substantial anti-religious element that is not conducive to freedom of religion or belief. That is the main contribution that he's working towards. When speaking about secular and secularism, he explains it shortly, introduces several definitions, but he doesn't start from one definition. He generally focuses on the fact that we speak about political secularism, and political secularism focuses on the so-called separation between religion and state. And in that separation of religion and state in Europe, typically religion is to be subordinated to the state and to its ideals. The data that he uses are the religion and state data set, the 214 data set, which is publicly available on their website. So when we're speaking about Europe, he speaks about 43 states, and that's what we also asked him to do. That means the members of the Council of Europe, which include all EU countries, but also, for example, Georgia, also the UK, and also we asked him to look also at Belarus and Russia, include that as well. And he says, when we look at these 43 countries, actually there are three groups when we look at their constitution. There are those that are declaring that there is an official religion, in their country, like Denmark, Greece, Finland, etc. And there are also states which declare a separation of religion and state, or even literally say we are a secular state. Countries such as Azerbaijan, France, Spain, and Germany. And these are the two groups actually that he will focus on in this article, but he mentions also that there are countries, states that declare neither the separation of religion and state nor an official religion. Looking at all the countries that are part of it, as you can see on the left, about half of them declare a separation of religion and state. About 6 have an official religion. There are some which declare secularism, and also quite a number which do not address the issue of religion and state in their constitution. And the main comparison will be between countries that declare the separation between religion and state and those who have an official religion. That is what he will focus on in the article. So first topic to look at in more detail is government support for religion. And Fox argues that in general, state support for religion predicts lower levels of freedom of religion belief and higher levels of government-based religious discrimination. So if a state supports a religion, typically it means less freedom, religious freedom, and it means more discrimination of minorities. He also says state support is typically intertwined with control and interference, and state support typically means that other religions, minority religions, are discriminated against. And this is the particular thing when he looks at Europe, and this is the main contribution of his article. Only here in Europe, levels of support of religion are higher in countries which declare separation of religion and state than those who don't address it, an official religion or separation of religion and state. And what does it mean when we're talking about government support of religion? He speaks about many different things, and he listed in the article. But that is, for example, the funding of schools. That's a form of support of the government. That can be religious taxes that are introduced in the country. That can be blasphemy laws. That can also be, for example, that burials are only controlled by religious laws. But it also can mean airing time on television, etc. So there are many ways in which governments can and do support religion. And when we then look at the typical or the level of state support, we should first look at the rest of the world, and then we will see what is so special about Europe. When we look at the rest of the world, typically countries which have a Christian minority have limited support, right? As you see here, and typically the separation of religion and state countries, so countries which say there should be a separation, have less support, of course, you would expect, than of religion than countries which have an official religion. When we look at countries with an other than Christian majority, so for example, with a Hindu majority, a Buddhist majority, or an Islamic majority, there is a lot of support for religion when they have one official religion, when their majority religion is an official religion, and there is less, of course, much less, if there is a separation of religion and state. Looking then at Europe, then we see how particular this is. One is quite particular, that Europe has more support for religion than other Christian majority countries in the world. Yeah? And second, countries which proclaim in their constitution that they have separation of religion and state support religion more than you would expect based on the rest of the world. So to summarize that part, the funding of religion exists in Europe quite a lot, and it gives secular governments leverage over religion and also a reason for interference. So also governments which consider themselves to be secular and to have a separation of religion and state fund religion quite a bit, but they do that, so he argues, because it gives them leverage over these religions and also reasons to interfere in local religious matters. He also indicates that the funding is mostly present and very strong in religious education, in the support of clergy, and in the helping in the construction of buildings and the support of buildings. We might wonder why secular states would support religion. Those who say actually that there is a separation between religion and state. And he argues that they do that because sometimes it is better to keep your enemies closer than your friends, indicating in his perspective a anti-religious sentiment within these European secular states. So for him, secular in Europe seems to have an anti-religious meaning, which is not conducive of freedom of religion or belief. Second, when we look at government regulation, restrictions and controls of the majority religion, and we're speaking now about the majority religion, right? Then he indicates that there are anti-religious forms of secularism that consider religion as violent and dangerous and irrational. So there is a need to restrict them. This is how European countries often look at it. He says, though, at the same time, that Western citizens are generally not very religion averse. It's the governments that have a certain aversion towards religion, which is demonstrated in their policies, but that's not what is typically present in the minds and the hearts of Western citizens. In Europe, the state regulates religion much more than that religion influences the state. So there's always the fear that religion influences the state, but he says there is actually much more regulation of religion by the state than that. And he argues that countries which often have official religions, such as in Scandinavian countries or in the UK, they often are also secular in a way. And in what way? Because they want to use religion for government purposes rather than that they would support religion for ideological reasons. They don't support the local church because they believe in it in the first place, but because they want to use these religious communities. So Fox argues. So if we're speaking about regulation and restriction and control, we're speaking of the majority religion, and then we're speaking about elements such as religious political parties that are restricted, or clergy are not allowed to hold political office, or that access to places of worship is restricted, that clergy must be citizens and cannot come from another country, that they can be arrested, etc., etc. And these are the manners in which in many countries there is a form of regulation, restriction, and control of the majority religion. Again, looking at the situation of regulation of the majority religion, again, if you look at the rest of the world, then we see again in the countries with an other than Christian majority that there is quite a lot of regulation, right? Regulation is very high, even of the majority religion. In other Christian minority countries, it's typically quite low. In Europe, it is higher than in other Christian majority countries. So there is more regulation than in the rest of the world in the Christian majority countries. But as you can see, of course, substantially less than in countries with another majority. Third element, government-based religious discrimination. What is that? That means that a government particularly discriminates minority religions. So we're not speaking now anymore about the majority, but about the minority. And he says there are many ways in which minority religions are discriminated against. For example, in being allowed or not allowed to publicly or privately observe their religion, circumcision that can be allowed or disallowed often, or limited, religious dietary laws. It can also relate to religious education, which is allowed in the religion of the majority, but not of the minority religions, etc. And when we look in more detail at government-based religious discrimination, he says there can be certain secular motivations for such discrimination. And he says the main ones are first, moral superiority. also from secular perspective, one would say we have a moral superiority over these religions, and only religions that are consistent with our secular beliefs should be then entitled to FORB. And he says, and this is a quote from the article, from this perspective, secularism acts as a dominant totalitarian ideology in a manner similar to a religious state which imposes its values on non-believers. A second motivation for discrimination would be that religious minority engage in what the state considers then as abhorrent practices. And he focuses on three. First, ritual slaughter. And he indicates that this slaughter is being called, as I give here in the quotes, outdated, or that some state officials would say animal rights come before religion. And by consequence, in 7 Western European countries now, stunning laws are also part of the general slaughters rules, and there is no exception for religious slaughters. And this is, so Fox argues, a form of religious discrimination. Secondly, he focuses on infant circumcision and indicates that there are more and more countries, particularly also in the north, where circumcision is heavily regulated, which means, for example, that a doctor needs to be present at a circumcision. And third, he says there is a focus on modest dress for women, which often means headscarf. In many countries, this is limited for government employees, and this is growing. And Fox argues that, interestingly, there are 2 reasons why it is often forbidden. One, Muslim women are considered to be suppressed by it, or Muslim women are considered to be unwilling to integrate and therefore wear it. And and second reason to be against it would be because it is considered a display of religious presence. Looking at religious discrimination, you see again, if we look at the rest of the world, that in Christian majority countries there is much less discrimination than in Europe, while in other majority countries it is substantially more, but in very different manners. Let me move to the conclusions on this. In Europe, so he says, this data indicates the secular motive is a more powerful cause of government-based religious discrimination than religious motives. And again, he asks the question, why would states which promote separation between religion and state engage in such discrimination? Because they want to limit acts that contradict secular values, and because secular and separation can very well mean anti-religious, and this is what he is arguing for. So in conclusion, Europe has a distinct pattern, and I have explained it already. I will not repeat it here. And second, so Jonathan Fox says, the separation of religion and state in practice, and also full freedom of religion or belief, or in Europe, exception rather than the rule. And here I close my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jelle, for that introduction about this very interesting paper. I think it gives us a very interesting approach about the topic, especially with a very concrete example of Europe that many people who were not part of the European Union probably will have like an idea of how the secular state is in Europe, but we should try to look at this reality in deeper. These papers are very interesting in this topic for the ones that are interested to read this paper and the other paper inside of in the issue. I will share the website of the International Journal so you can download all the issues that you would like to read and the papers. And now I would like to introduce Dennis Petri, or International Director of the International Institute for Religious Freedom. He is the founder and scholar at large of the Observatory of Religious Freedom in Latin America and executive director of the Foundation Platform for Social Transformation. He is going to give us an introduction about the paper that he presented to this issue, and he will talk about the challenges to individual religious freedom in the indigenous communities in Latin America. Dennis? Your microphone.
Yes, thank you very much for this introduction, and it's a true pleasure to be with you today. I hope you can see my screen now. The article I'm going to present is called Challenges to Individual Religious Freedom in the Indigenous Communities of Latin America, the case of the NASA, which is it's the second largest indigenous group in Colombia. It's a group I did a lot of research on and field work as part of my PhD dissertation that I concluded in 2020. But the field work was done mainly in the period between 2010 and 2015. And it presents a very interesting case that provides some insights that can be useful to understand religious freedom at the conceptual level. Of course, I have always specialized in Latin America, but as a scholar, it's not Latin America that I'm interested in, right? What I'm interested in is in what those empirical materials teach us about the concept of religious freedom and how we can get to more general and broader understandings of these concepts. Before I start, I'd just like to mention the three main projects, the flagship projects of the International Institute for Religious Freedom that I have the honor of directing. So the first flagship project of the Institute is the International Journal for Religious Freedom. And so today we are launching the latest issue of this this journal that was guest edited by Professors Jelle, Creemers, and Tatiana as representatives of ISFORB, very close partners of the IIRF. So that's the first flagship project. The second one is the Violent Incidents Database, which is a very ambitious data collection project that actually will hopefully complement other FORB data sets in that it is events-based. It basically compiles all media records that we can find. We can never claim to be exhaustive of violence related to religious freedom, and in that we hope to present an additional insights into religious freedom violations that are not necessarily detected by other FORB datasets. That's why I say it's really a complement to those datasets. And then we're also working on the development of the Global Religious Freedom Index. This is in partnership with the Religion and State Project. Jelle already presented the Religion and State Project based on his presentation of Jonathan Fox's article. What we are currently doing is in partnership with the Religion and State Project and Jonathan Fox, we are updating this data set to 2022 or 2023 actually, and we plan to turn it into an index. So that's also something to look out for. That's a project that will take at least 2 more years to complete. So that's just for the general presentation of the IIRF. Regarding the religious freedom in indigenous communities in Latin America, indeed, I worked on this article, which is basically one of the case studies that I included in my PhD dissertation, and that I updated a little bit for publication in this issue because of its affinity with the subject of the overall subject of the issue. But even more recently, myself and a couple of colleagues had the opportunity of doing a research report for the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, where we had the opportunity to really look at religious freedom more broadly in all indigenous communities in Latin America. And in my presentation, I'll mainly focus on the more recent information from that report, actually, because I think it's more interesting for this audience today, and also more up to date. one of the aspects that we explain in that report, and it's also informed by previous research, is that there are basically two types of threats to the religious freedom of indigenous communities. And those would be external threats and internal threats. And I think it's important to make that analytical distinction because it's often misunderstood. And I see that evangelical groups, advocacy groups, tend to focus mainly on the internal threats, whereas the more secular groups and also international organizations and advocates for indigenous rights tend to focus more on the external threats. But as we know, religious freedom is a multi-dimensional concept, and it protects, in theory at least, both individual and collective expressions. And the problem with that in the indigenous communities in Latin America, generally speaking, not just the NASA community that I studied in depth, but in general, is that there are tensions between those two dimensions. The external threats really are related to external threats. So threats by states that disrespect the indigenous territories, or multinational corporations, mining companies, for example, or logging companies, right, that do or provoke environmental damage to those communities. And disrespect their land. And the reason why this is a religious freedom issue is, and this is a little bit of religious sociology, but in the indigenous worldview, in most indigenous worldviews, the territory is considered as the sacred place, as the temple. And so anything that happens on the territory, a police officer entering the territory, or someone coming in and cutting down a tree, or a mining company, or even a religious missionary entering into the territory, is in essence a violation of religious freedom. And I think it's very important to conceptualize that. And so in the report that we did for ISFORB, we identified 5 threats in this external dimension, which are related to a lack of recognition of ancestral land and land ownership, state absence, coupled with organized crime, extraction of natural resources by legal and illegal entities, breakdown of the social fabric, and dispossession through appropriation. I could go more in detail into those threats, but they're all related to this idea of actors foreign or outside indigenous communities entering those indigenous communities for whatever purpose, and the fact that they're entering disrespects not just the territory, but also the sacred nature of those territories, and thus can be interpreted as a violation of religious freedom. But it doesn't stop there. There are also major internal threats to the religious freedom in indigenous communities. And that is mainly when individuals within an indigenous community decide to convert away from the majority religion. Mostly it would be the ancestral religious practices of the indigenous communities. And sometimes those practices are syncretically mixed with Catholicism, or will be folk expressions of Catholicism. And that creates very important tensions. And as I also described in the article, leads to very serious human security threats. So conversion is the main issue that results in threats. There's also the issue of contributions to patronal feasts, because converts don't want to participate in those traditions that they now consider to be of another religion they want to move away from. But that destabilizes also the unity of and the stability in the political order of those indigenous communities. Construction of temples, as I said before, the indigenous worldviews consider the territory as the temple. And so if a newly convert wants to set up a church on that territory, it's essentially viewed as a violation of religious freedom, because it's building a church on the property of a temple, right? Of the ancestral religion. So it's but denying the possibility for the construction of a church is actually also a religious freedom violation, but of the individual dimension of religious freedom. So that's where there really is a complicated situation. Proselytism, I'll come back to that, but missionary activity is heavily restricted to protect the religious freedom of indigenous communities perceived from an external dimension or collective dimension. But of course, restricting proselytism is also restricting an essential dimension of religious freedom, and that's where we see that tension. And then renunciation of ancestral practice with all kinds of consequences. Now, quantifying external threats is very difficult. We can describe them; they're very frequent, but they're also diffuse because it basically anything that touches upon indigenous territories, indigenous lands is or can be seen as a violation of religious freedom in its collective dimension. But with internal threats, we have used the Violent Incidents Database, which is the big data collection project of the International Institute for Religious Freedom and also the Observatory of Religious Freedom in Latin America, to identify and quantify the threats that we have. And so in the report we did for the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, we were able to identify these numbers. We focus specifically on Chile, Colombia, and Mexico, because that's where there is a higher incidence of threats, and we had access to information, and so we see there's quite substantial numbers of violations. I have another slide here that gives a few more ideas. This is data we collected between 2018 and 2022. We have more updated data for 2023. This was a very nice table. For example, 7 people got killed in Colombia during that period, 6 in Mexico. When it comes to forced displacement, for example, that's a huge category, 651 in Colombia and 624 in Mexico. And this is happening as a consequence of conversion. So to finalize this discussion a little bit, the solution that has been offered to the religious freedom violations has been to grant indigenous communities self-determination rights, which was also the correction of a historical injustice, right? Since colonial times, indigenous communities have been attacked and damaged and partially or sometimes even completely destroyed. And so it is definitely a solution to the violations of the collective dimension. The problem is that it actually creates a new problem, and that is that there are important tensions regarding the internal dimension. And because there are self-determination rights, it's very difficult for national and international legal institutions to intervene in indigenous communities to address these situations. Connected to that is the particular issue of proselytism. As I said before, proselytism from the collective perspective is a threat, right, to the preservation of indigenous cultures and religions. That is understood, and therefore it should be restricted to protect the collective dimension of religious freedom, and that's what has happened very often. But of course, restricting proselytism is also a violation of the individual dimension of religious freedom. So how do we deal with that? And how do we protect the minority in the minority, right? The indigenous community as such is the minority that needs to be protected, but there's minorities within that minority that convert away from traditional religion. What to do about that? How can their rights and religious rights be protected? And this brings us, and I want to close with that, to the issue of balancing rights, right? How do you balance collective and individual rights? And this is always a tension that can also be observed in Europe. And I think reflecting on this tension can possibly also inspire reflection on these solutions. I don't think there is any template, recipe that we can come up with, but we need tailor-made solutions. But it's a very, very real thing, and so I think highlighting this is, I think, the main value of this of this contribution. I'll leave it here for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis, for give us the introduction about the paper and the reality that you have seen and researched here in Latin America, especially in this case. And as you said, it's not only some drivers that we can see in the indigenous communities, but we can see these situations in the different contexts. I would like to open this last part of the webinar to some last comments that we have. The panelists or maybe the audience, you can send some questions on the chat. Okay, we have a question for Jelle. You say you do not necessarily agree with everything Jonathan Fox proposed. What do you see differently? Let's share that.
Well, thank you. It's, yeah, I wouldn't say that I disagree with. I mean, he's very good in this kind of research, right? Which is based on his database, actually quantifying many issues that are related to religious freedom and religion and state relations. But this kind of research also has typical disadvantages, and I think this is where I feel a bit uncomfortable with. For example, the lack of definition of what is secular then. As I said in the beginning, he doesn't really give a definition. And then later he will quite easily shift from a country which has or mentioned separation of religion and state to saying that it is a secular country, and then also saying that countries which have a official religion can also be secular countries. So I lack some clarity here and there. While there is clarity on some issues, he's very, very strict in separating, and others he is not. And of course, there are issues of definitions in which I think, yeah, I would like to see more nuance in that. For example, the question of what is discrimination? The example that has been given and that he uses as well quite extensively is actually gives 3 examples of discrimination on which he focuses, and one of them would be then the circumcision, right? Is it discrimination if Jews and Muslims are not allowed to do circumcisions? In a way, you can say yes, it's religious discrimination, but you can say, yeah, but it's not that no religion is allowed to do that. I mean, or that they are discriminated, but Catholics are allowed to do it. No, it's not typically a discrimination of a minority. It's a discrimination of, or it's something that is disallowed for all religions. And in these kinds of questions, I think I would prefer a more nuanced argumentation for why would you consider certain things to be discrimination and others not. But yeah, I do know, of course, that he has written extensively on it, and in other articles he explains it much more. But this is where I feel a bit discomfort. I think it's more that I feel discomfort with certain things that I would say I strictly disagree with certain positions he takes or arguments he makes.
Thank you, Jelle. If someone of the panelists has another question for another panelist. Maybe I would like to ask Dennis, maybe you can give us your opinion. Do you think that Latin America in some ways becoming more secular, or because we're present in the public debate about that we should be, most of our countries should be more secular, but is this really happening in Latin America? The laws are changing, or the debate is more present in the different Congress, or this is not really the reality that we are going through the region yet?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I'm not sure how much time there is to really unpack that question. But maybe just to get back to the particular situation of indigenous communities, the issue of secularism. One dimension. I'm not going to answer your question completely, but one dimension of secularism is also, well, not secularism, but of secularization, actually, is that there is perhaps lesser understanding of what is sensitive and what's important to religious communities, right? And so, for example, the way proselytism is easily is banned in indigenous communities and easily accepted under the pretense that this is a way to protect the culture of indigenous communities. And you could say, also following your line of thought, Jelle, that that's not a form of religious discrimination. It's just it's motivated by the desire to protect and preserve the cultural integrity of the indigenous communities. It does violate religious freedom because the right to share about one's faith is also a dimension of religious freedom. And so one concern I do see in Latin America is that there is among policymakers not a real understanding of that kind of thing, right? So yeah, I mean, there's so much more I could say, but for the sake of time, I think I should leave it here. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dennis. Thank you, Tatiana. Thank you, Jelle, for your time for sharing with us these insights about the volume, about your appreciation about this special topic that has to do with the secular states and the relation with religion. We have last questions that I will send them right to the panelists. We can try to answer it by email because we are very short of time. So thank you very much for all the attendees. Thank you, the panelists, and I hope to see you in the next webinar. So be attentive to our social media and our invitation. So thank you very much.